The slap rang out in the confined cabin, drowning out the steady roar of the engines. The air seemed to freeze as Major Camille Brooks' head tilted to one side from the unexpected strike, her military cap tumbling down the aisle. Silence enveloped the cabin. That heavy silence, the kind that often follows an act of violence, leaving everyone stunned, lasted only a few seconds before it was shattered by heavy breathing, whispered conversations, and the continuous sound of phone cameras. Camille's cheek burned, but that sensation was nothing compared to the fire that was building up in her chest. After 22 years of military service, the steel discipline had taught her how to remain calm. But in her mind, Camille was battling a storm of emotions: shock, embarrassment, anger, and above all, an exhausting realization that despite wearing a uniform, having served 3 tours in Afghanistan, having received medals to some people, she was still just a black woman, someone who could be attacked without fear of consequence. Heather Collins, the flight attendant who had struck her, stood there, her hands still hadn't fully dropped. Heather's face was taut, caught between self-satisfied anger and a slow recognition of what she had just done. "You don't belong in first class," Heather hissed, her voice low but audible. "And you don't get to speak to me like that." Camille clenched the phone in her hand as if it were the tether that kept her grounded in reality. 3 rows behind Jaden Lee, a 16-year-old teenager, was shaking as he recorded the entire scene, his mind quickly calculating how many views the video would get once it was uploaded. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Ellis sensed that something was off in the atmosphere of the flight. His instincts, honed over decades of flying, told him something had gone wrong. He reached for the communication system, unaware that the flight from Dallas to San Diego had veered off course, not technically, but socially and systemically. In seat 14F by the window, 73-year-old Evelyn Parker clutched her crucifix necklace and muttered, "Oh my God." The words were unclear as to whether she was defending the flight attendant or protesting her actions, and Evelyn intentionally left it for others to decide, no one in the cabin from the pilot preparing to reassure through the loudspeaker to the teenager filming in his mind, or the elderly woman whispering prayers could have known that Major Camille Brooks was holding a power far beyond the standards of commercial aviation. As her thumb slid through her contacts and landed on General Thomas Grayson's name, Camille had made a decision. That decision would not only ground the plane, but would also force the long-held illusions of justice many Americans had clung to for years to face a brutal truth. 3 hours earlier, Camille had arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as early as usual, a habit formed from her early days in the military. She had been trained to believe arriving early is on time. On time is late. Late is unacceptable. 22 years later, Camille still lived by that rule. As she passed through security, with her uniform pressed to perfection, a TSA agent nodded respectfully when she placed her hat, shoes, and laptop into the plastic bin. Camille smiled faintly, responding to that respect. Not every day was this pleasant. Not everyone recognized her authority, but today seemed to be going smoothly. It was just a normal work trip to San Diego for a logistics conference, a field in which she had led many complex operations in the Middle East. "Thank you for your service, ma'am," the TSA agent said as she collected her items. "I appreciate it." "Thank you," Camille replied. The exchange had become so familiar it almost felt like a ritual, like the handshake between 2 strangers who shared the same spirit. On her way to gate B-22, Camille passed by a news screen. Another incident of police shooting a black person in Chicago. Protests were being planned and Congress was holding hearings on racial discrimination in law enforcement. The ticker at the bottom mentioned the deployment of the National Guard to handle the protests. She stopped watching the National Guard standing in line between the protesters and the police. "This will just escalate things," Camille whispered. "Are you talking to yourself, Major?" A familiar voice called from behind Camille, turned to see Colonel Marcus Avery, his uniform as impeccable as hers, his shoulders bearing the shiny rank of a full colonel. A wave of warmth rose in Camille's chest. "Marcus, I didn't know you were going to the conference." They hugged briefly, not as superiors and subordinates, but as friends forged through shared missions and long tense nights in combat zones. "I was called in for the emergency response seminar," Marcus explained as they walked together. "General Grayson thought my experience with Hurricane Maria relief could be useful." Camille nodded. "You're the right person for it." Logistics in disaster relief and war have more in common than people realize. Marcus lowered his voice. "By the way, there's a rumor that Grayson is considering you for the Deputy Special Advisor position for the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Camille froze for a moment. "I haven't heard anything about that." "No one has," Marcus chuckled lightly. "Grayson keeps things tight. But my assistant overheard a conversation, Camille. You deserve that position. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." She didn't need further explanation. She understood, at the highest levels, there were still too many white men. The promotion of a black woman would cause a stir. "Let's wait and see," she replied, then changed the subject. "How's Monica and the kids?" "Monica's busy with the clinic. Jordan just started college, and Alyssa's about to graduate from high school. We're all good." He glanced quickly at Camille's left hand. It remained empty. "What about you? Anyone special?" Camille laughed. "Are you two still trying to set me up?" The answer is still. No, she thought of her last date, just 3 dinners before the man began hinting that she should resign from the military, as if her career was a hobby that could be put on hold. Complicated, she concluded. Complicated is just another way of saying no strategic solution yet. Marcus smiled lightly. Military language was their way of avoiding personal matters. When they reached Gate B-22, the crowd of passengers had gathered. The loudspeaker just announced the beginning of boarding for first-class passengers. "It's my turn," Camille Brooks said, pulling out her boarding pass. "I occasionally treat myself." Marcus Avery smiled. "You deserve it. Regular seats aren't meant for flights longer than an hour. I'm on the next flight." He added, "I have a meeting with officials at the Department of Defense HQ tomorrow morning, so I'll be staying overnight." They hugged one last time, a quick but warm embrace. "Make a great impression at the conference." Marcus patted her shoulder. "And Camille, don't forget what I said about Grayson. Big things are coming your way. Be ready." Camille nodded and stepped into the boarding line, feeling a familiar weight pressing down on her shoulders. Not quite pressure, but enough to remind her that she carried more than just her uniform. It was the burden of representing people like her, the first, the only one in far too many rooms. She handed her boarding pass to the ticket agent. The smile on her face flickered, then vanished as quickly as a shadow. "Thank you for your service," the agent said, her voice dry and awkward, as if reciting from a handbook. Camille nodded and walked down the jet bridge toward the plane, unaware that just behind her the woman had quickly texted a friend, "Get ready." There's a woman in uniform boarding first class. You can tell by her face that she'll be demanding. On Delta Flight 1380, The first-class cabin was only half full when Camille entered. The soft, dim lighting, the pristine white leather seats, so different from the military cargo flights she was accustomed to. She made her way to the window seat, 3A, stowing her luggage in the overhead compartment with swift, familiar movements. As she sat down, Camille quickly noticed the gaze of a flight attendant, a woman in her 40s, blonde hair tightly pinned behind her head. Camille couldn't mistake that expression. The look of someone who had already scripted the scenario in their head and was waiting for someone to prove them right. The attendant, whose name tag read Heather Collins, approached. Her smile was practiced, but her eyes were empty. "Let me see your boarding pass." Heather said, her voice lacking any politeness, more like an order than a request. Camille handed over her pass without saying a word, maintaining her calm demeanor. The expression that had kept her steady in combat, Heather studied the boarding pass with obvious suspicion. She flipped it back and forth as if hoping to find something off first time flying first class. She asked, then handed it back with 2 fingers as though afraid to touch Camille. "No," Camille replied briefly. She knew that explaining herself here would be pointless, even bowing her head to an unwarranted suspicion. "If you're not familiar, just call me Heather," continued with a smug smile. Then she turned to greet the next passenger, a middle-aged white man in a suit with a warm, familiar greeting, Mr. Peterson. "Is it you again? When we're stable, I'll bring you your whiskey as usual." Camille took a deep breath, then turned her gaze to the window. This wasn't the first time she'd faced subtle discrimination like this, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But she had learned how to keep her perspective. Compared to commanding a helicopter evacuation under fire or negotiating with insurgent leaders for civilian aid, the disrespect from a flight attendant was just a mosquito, annoying, but not worth getting angry over. At least that's what she told herself. The cabin gradually filled up. A teenage Asian boy entered, sat in the aisle seat next to Camille, his eyes glued to his phone fingers, swiping quickly as if competing in a speed contest. Across the aisle, an elderly woman in a floral dress looking to be in her 70s was arranging a pile of neck pillows around her seat, almost like making a nest. She caught Camille's gaze, flashed a tight, scrutinizing smile, then turned away to rummage through her oversized purse. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Delta Airlines Flight 1380 to San Diego." Captain Robert Ellis's voice rang out over the intercom. "We hope you have a smooth flight today. Flight time is approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes. Camille noticed that during the safety demonstration, Heather deliberately avoided looking in her direction. Yet she was excessively cheerful with the other passengers. From the moment the plane began to taxi until it took off, when drinks were served, hot towels were handed out, and orders for drinks were taken, Camille was always the last to be served, or sometimes overlooked altogether if possible. An hour later, as lunch service began, the teenage boy finally looked up from his phone. "Are you really military?" he asked, looking at Camille's uniform as if he had just discovered something really cool. Camille smiled. "Yeah, I'm military. My cousin just joined the Marines last year. He's stationed in South Korea. Now," he said, offering his hand, "I'm Jaden Lee, Major Camille Brooks," she replied, shaking his hand. "What a coincidence I was stationed there when I first started." "Really? That's awesome. I'll tell my cousin about you." Before he could finish, Heather pushed the food cart over chicken or noodles. She asked Jaden, her smile as bright as if she were in front of a camera. Chicken?" Jaden replied, still looking at Camille, clearly more interested in continuing the conversation than thinking about the food. Heather handed the tray to Jaden with perfect courtesy, then turned to Camille, her smile fading instantly. "Noodles," she said, not asking, but stating it as a fact, already holding the other tray. "If you have any chicken left, I'd like that one," Camille said softly, politely. "We only have the exact number of portions prepared." Heather replied, her smile strained. "But the noodles are really good. I understand." "That's fine. Thank you." Heather handed the tray to Camille but tilted it at an angle, spilling salad dressing onto her uniform. "Oh," she pretended to be surprised. "I'm so clumsy. Let me get a napkin for you." Camille sat still, showing no sign of anger, not reacting. "Thank you," she said calmly. Jaden watched the scene with wide eyes. His gaze shifted from the spreading stain on Camille's pants to her calm face. "Did she just—" he stammered. "It's okay." Camille interrupted gently but firmly. "It's not a big deal." But as she used the tiny cocktail napkin Heather handed her to wipe off the stain, a familiar feeling rose within her, that sensation when your self-respect is attacked, but you still have to maintain professionalism. The feeling of being tested by small yet toxic behaviors, the burning sensation spread under her uniform, not just from the stain on her pants, but from Camille Brooks' own internal turmoil. It was a feeling all too familiar, one she had encountered in conference rooms at the Department of Defense HQ, where male colleagues spoke over her. She had faced it in Baghdad when local officials refused to negotiate just because she was a woman. And now, that same feeling was present here in the sky. When someone's gaze only rested on the color of her skin, regardless of what she had sacrificed and accomplished, Jaden Lee couldn't easily let it go. He shook his head, whispering as if he couldn't believe it. "This is not right. She's clearly doing it on purpose." Camille nodded slightly, no longer denying it. "Maybe, but getting angry won't clean the stain, right?" "Probably not." Jaden exhaled, then his eyes lit up. "My mom always carries a stain wipe in her bag. Maybe someone around here has one?" Before Camille could respond, Jaden turned to the elderly woman sitting across the aisle. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you happen to have a stain wipe?" The woman, clearly having been watching them with curiosity, was startled by the direct question. "Pardon me." "Dear Jaden," pointed at Camille. "It's for her uniform." The flight attendant spilled sauce on it. The elderly woman gave Camille a familiar scrutinizing glance, then rummaged through her purse. "I might have one, here it is." She pulled out a small tied-to-go packet and handed it, not to Camille but to Jaden. An odd handoff, like an unspoken challenge. "Thank you, ma'am," Jaden said, then handed the packet to Camille. "I'm Jaden, and this is Major Brooks, Evelyn Parker." The woman replied with a small but clear nod. "My husband served in the military in Korea." Camille took the item, smiling gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. My condolences for your husband." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, dear. If my Walter were still alive, he wouldn't stand for the way that flight attendant acted. Anyone in uniform deserves respect, no matter." She paused, not finishing the sentence either, unwilling or feeling it unnecessary. Camille carefully wiped the stain, feeling both Jaden and Evelyn's eyes on her, not with pity, rather with witnessing eyes. They saw her clearly, not just as a symbol. That quiet emotion brought Camille back to the present moment. It reminded her why she had stood strong all these years, but it also reignited a sense of loneliness, the feeling she had when she was the only one with her skin color in a room full of power. Major Brooks, Jaden, spoke up clearly, wanting to change the subject after the quiet moment. What do you do in the military? Have you ever been to the battlefield? The innocent yet concerned question made Camille smile gently. I work in logistics and strategic coordination. To put it simply, I ensure my troops have everything they need in the right place at the right time. Kinda like Amazon, but for war, huh? Jaden grinned. Camille burst out laughing a real laugh, the first one that day. Actually, that comparison isn't bad, but I'm pretty sure Amazon doesn't deliver under mortar fire. Have you really been shot at? Jaden's eyes widened a few times. There were moments I lost count. The boy looked at her with a different gaze, not just admiration, but understanding. And Evelyn, across the aisle, began to look at Camille with a new expression. No longer skepticism, no longer judgment, but recognition, quiet but sincere. From then on, the conversation between the three of them became lighter. Jaden mentioned that he was into computer science even though his parents always wanted him to become a doctor. Evelyn shared that she was flying to San Diego to visit her first great-granddaughter after having 4 grandsons. Perhaps, feeling safe in the genuine care, Camille began to share more about the upcoming conference. Actually, she confessed, I'm being considered for a new position. I'd be on the advisory team for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That sounds really important, Jaden said, his eyes wide with excitement. It is, Camille nodded. That position would allow me to have a say in high-level strategic decisions. Wow. Evelyn unexpectedly chimed in. My Walter used to say, the military always recognizes talent no matter where it comes from. He served in one of the first racially integrated units. She continued. Camille was about to respond when Heather Collins appeared beside them, her voice as sweet as honey, but her eyes sharp as a knife. Sorry, but some passengers have complained that your conversation is disturbing the peace. She said first class is meant for relaxation. Camille glanced around. No one seemed to notice them. Some passengers were even speaking louder. I'm sorry if we've disturbed anyone, Camille replied, trying to maintain politeness. We'll keep it quieter. Jaden wasn't going to take it lying down. No one's complained. You just don't want us talking to her. Heather's professional veneer cracked for a moment. Kid, you better mind your own business and respect your elders. I am respecting her. Jaden retorted, pointing at Camille. Respecting someone who deserves it. Jaden, Camille said softly yet firmly. It's fine. But by now, the entire cabin had started paying attention. Many passengers were watching them, their eyes seemingly waiting for what would happen next. Perhaps Evelyn interjected her voice, not loud but filled with authority. You should bring us some more drinks that might be more helpful than monitoring perfectly normal conversations. Dear Heather's face turned red, stuck between the elderly woman she couldn't afford to offend and the people she was trying to control. Finally, she just muttered, I'll be back with the drinks later, and walked away. Thank you both, Camille said softly. But really, it's not necessary, it is. Evelyn responded, her gaze sharp. My husband didn't go to war to have people treat people like you this way. She stared at Camille. The thing with your uniform, it's not an accident, is it? Camille was silent for a moment, then shook her head. I thought so. Evelyn said, her voice deepening. My daughter's been a flight attendant for United for over 25 years. She'd never do something like that. She really has issues. Jaden chimed in, pulling out his phone. I've already filmed most of that. My TikTok's about to. Don't post it, Camille interrupted gently but firmly. This isn't something to turn into a spectacle." Jaden looked a little disappointed but nodded. "Okay, but if she keeps this up, I have proof." The three of them went back to their unfinished conversation, this time with a quieter, more measured tone. But the atmosphere had changed. The entire first-class cabin was watching them now, not just with curiosity, but with an unspoken, uneasy feeling. Heather had almost disappeared. She handed over the service duties to a younger flight attendant, someone who said nothing but whose gaze clearly conveyed confusion about the tense atmosphere she walked into. As the plane flew over the Colorado River, a winding strip beneath the sky, Camille suddenly realized that she had said more than she thought about her career, about the times she had been tested, and about the heavy feeling of always being the first or the only one in important rooms. Jaden Lee listened with a look of admiration far beyond his 16 years. Evelyn Parker, from time to time, added to the conversation with her memories of growing up during the civil rights struggles in America. "My first teaching job was at a newly integrated school in Mississippi," she said, "in 1968 back then. Just teaching math to black students was enough to get me a pile of hate mail." She shook her head, her eyes clouding slightly, but I had to keep going. What else could I do? Jaden raised his phone and waved it. "I have to record this, so people can't pretend like it didn't happen." Camille Brooks smiled faintly. It was strange how a teenager, a retired teacher, and a military officer could be so in tune with one another. 3 generations, 3 lives finding common ground beneath the skies of America. In that moment, Camille saw it as a microcosm of the country at its best, ready to face the truth, painful but necessary, and then move forward together. The cabin lights began to dim to allow passengers to rest. Camille glanced toward the galley and caught Heather Collins staring at them, her cold gaze full of hatred. Camille didn't need any more signs after years of operating in dangerous zones. Her instincts told her clearly this wasn't over. The plane began to shake slightly as it passed through a turbulent patch near Kansas. It wasn't enough to make people pray, but enough to make every sip of coffee a challenge, and walking down the aisle felt like a balance test. Captain Robert Ellis's voice came through the intercom, steady and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing light turbulence. I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Please return to your seats, and flight attendants, please take your seats as well." Camille had been dozing, but now woke up tightening her seatbelt. Jaden remained unfazed, still absorbed in his phone game, completely unaffected by the plane's mild shaking. Across the aisle, Evelyn gripped the armrest, her knuckles turning white, her lips silently mouthing a prayer. "It's just turbulence," Camille reassured, "totally normal." Evelyn nodded, but still looked uneasy. "I've never liked this part of flying, Walter. My husband used to hold my hand through these bumpy patches." Without thinking, Camille reached her hand across the aisle and extended it. Evelyn looked at her in surprise, then with emotion. She placed her wrinkled, age-spotted hand into Camille's. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. "My kids think I'm afraid for no reason." "Being afraid isn't unreasonable," Camille said. "Accepting help isn't either." That moment of connection was immediately broken when Heather appeared citing seatbelt checks, even though the captain had already instructed the attendants to return to their seats. She stopped right at their row, her eyes focused on the 2 hands still holding each other across the aisle. "You should return to your seat," Camille said, calm but clear, using the authoritative tone she was used to in situations requiring control. Heather frowned. "I don't take orders from passengers." "It's not an order," Camille replied. "It's an instruction from the captain." for your safety." "I know my job," Heather snapped, trying to assert the last bit of authority she thought she still had. Just then, the plane jolted more sharply, causing several passengers to jump. Heather lost her balance and had to grab onto Camille's seat back to steady herself. "Please sit down," Camille repeated, this time with a voice sharp as a blade. Perhaps that was when something in Heather finally snapped. Maybe it was the buildup of tension, or perhaps long-suppressed dissatisfaction finally found its release. "You don't have the right to give me orders," Heather growled, leaning close to Camille's face. "You people always think you're the exception, don't you?" The entire cabin suddenly went silent. The background hum of conversation faded. The 3 words, "you people," hung in the air, heavy like a stone. "What did you just say?" Camille asked, her voice no longer soft but cold as ice. "You heard me," Heather replied, not backing down. "You come into first class, demanding special treatment, acting like you're in charge here. I've flown this route for 15 years. I can spot people who like privileges." Camille slowly released her grip on Evelyn's hand, turned fully to face Heather. "I want to speak to the captain." She said each word clear and sharp as if forged from steel. "The captain is flying the plane." Heather sneered. "He doesn't have time for complaints from passengers." "This isn't a complaint," Camille said, her eyes unwavering. "This is a security issue." The smile faded from Heather's face. "What security issue?" "The issue that's happening right now," Camille said, starting to rise from her seat. Despite the seatbelt sign still being on, "I am a United States Army officer, and you have been discriminating against me, harassing me since I boarded this plane." Heather's face turned bright red. "You're accusing me of slander." "I'm not accusing you," Camille replied flatly. "I'm stating the facts. Now I want to speak to the captain or the head flight attendant if not." Jaden, who had been quietly filming with his phone the whole time now, held up the phone openly. "I've got it all on tape," he said loudly, "including when you spilled the sauce on her." Passengers around them began to turn, sensing the escalation in the situation. Many of them pulled out their phones, ready to record. "Stop filming." Heather yelled, then reached for Jaden's phone. "Don't touch him," Camille warned, her voice booming like thunder. A voice that had once silenced insurgents in Baghdad. Heather froze, but only for a few seconds before she made a fatal mistake. She turned back to Camille, pointing at her chest. "You need to understand who has authority on this flight. Pull your hand back." Camille said each word cold as ice, but Heather leaned in even closer. "Or what? What are you going to do? 'Cause a scene, get thrown off the plane. I don't think your precious uniform will protect you. So sit down, shut up, and—" Her last words were drowned out by a violent jolt. She lost her balance, instinctively grabbing onto Camille's seat, and that hand, like a slap, struck Camille's cheek. The sound of the slap echoed loudly in the confined cabin, drowning out the engine noise. Time seemed to slow. Camille's head tilted to the side, her cap flying off, hitting the floor. Silence enveloped the space like a heavy blanket. Then, as if on cue, Whisper's phones rising and eyes fixated on them. Camille's cheek burned, but that pain was nothing compared to the fire raging inside her. 2 decades of training kept her seated, but inside a storm of emotions overwhelmed her. Shock, humiliation, anger, and a realization she knew all too well. Even in a military uniform, after 3 tours of duty with medals to her name. To some people, she was still just a black woman. Someone they thought could be attacked without consequence. Heather still stood there, her hands half raised as if frozen. Her face displayed a mix of rage and fear, as if she still couldn't believe what she had just done. "You don't belong in first class." Heather Collins hissed her voice, barely loud enough for Camille to hear over the growing buzz of the cabin. "And you don't have the right to speak to me like that." Camille Brooks gripped her phone tightly, as if holding onto an anchor to keep calm amidst the rising waves. 3 rows behind Jaden Lee still held his phone, his hands shaking slightly, eyes flickering constantly as if his brain was calculating how many views this video would get. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Ellis felt the shift in the atmosphere of the plane, not from the pressure, but from the instincts of someone who had logged thousands of hours in the air. He reached for the communication system, unaware that the flight from Dallas to San Diego had veered off its normal route in a completely different way. In seat 14F, Evelyn Parker clutched her crucifix, whispering, "Oh my God." But it was unclear whether she was shocked by the flight attendant's behavior or by Camille's response. That ambiguity reflected the mindset of many people in the cabin, those still wondering if they had just witnessed an incident or a truth being exposed. None of them, neither the captain about to ask for calm over the PA, nor Jaden editing the clip on his phone, nor Evelyn praying. To God knew that Camille was not just an ordinary passenger. She could call a name that would change the course of the entire flight. Her fingers glided across her contacts. When they stopped at the name General Thomas Grayson, she had made a decision not just to stop what was happening on the plane, but to stop the lingering illusions that everything was okay, that America had progressed beyond this. In the cockpit, Captain Ellis had just passed through the turbulence when First Officer Rachel Tan pointed to the light, signaling from the passenger cabin. "Must be someone needing a sick bag," she joked, though her voice lacked humor. At that moment, the intercom rang. Ellis picked up Captain speaking. Logan Price, the head flight attendant in the economy section, spoke with tension in his voice. "Captain, there's a serious incident in first class. A confrontation between the flight attendant and a passenger. It's gotten out of hand." Ellis's tone grew serious. What exactly happened? Heather hit a passenger, a military officer. Logan lowered his voice. "There's video, multiple passengers are filming." "My God," Ellis muttered. He glanced at Rachel, his eyes silently saying, "This is no small incident." "Is anyone injured?" he asked. "No medical emergency yet, but the tension is high. Camille, the officer's demanding to speak directly with the captain." Ellis sighed. At an altitude of 11,000 meters over Kansas, with over an hour of flight remaining, changing course was a big decision, but letting the situation escalate further would be even more dangerous. "Get Heather to the back. Temporarily isolate her," he ordered. "Have Brianna take over in first class. I'll head there immediately." Handing control to Rachel, Ellis stepped out of the cockpit. As he walked down the aisle, he felt the eyes of dozens of passengers on him. When he reached first class, he found the scene like a silent trial unfolding. In the 3rd row, Camille sat upright in her military uniform, a red mark clearly visible on her cheek. On either side of her were Jaden and Evelyn, like silent protectors. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Robert Ellis," he said, keeping his voice completely calm. "I've been informed of the incident." Camille looked up, her voice not loud but firm. "That's right. Captain, your flight attendant attacked me after a series of disrespectful and discriminatory actions starting the moment I boarded. I've got it all on tape." Jaden interjected, holding up his phone. Others are filming too. At least 5 people are recording, Evelyn said, her eyes still fixed on Camille. What happened wasn't provoked, she was attacked for no reason. Ellis nodded slowly, maintaining his professional demeanor, though internally he was bracing for the media crisis that would follow. I need to hear the full story. Major Brooks Camille recounted everything from Heather's first look, her condescending ticket check, the deliberate spilling of sauce to the slap in the middle of the cabin. As she spoke, passengers nearby nodded in agreement, no one contradicting her. On behalf of the airline, I apologize for your experience, Ellis said after Camille finished. That behavior does not reflect our values. Heather has been suspended for the remainder of the flight, and I will file a full report upon landing. That's not enough, Camille replied, her voice steady. I've called my commander, General Grayson. This is not just personal behavior. This is a symptom of a deeper issue: systemic failure to ensure fair and respectful treatment. Ellis felt a cold shiver down his spine. Mentioning the Pentagon right now was like fanning the flames that were already burning. What do you want? Major Brooks, I'm not demanding anything, Captain Camille replied. I'm just informing you that General Grayson is in contact with Delta's executive board right now. The plane will be met by military personnel upon landing. I'll be providing an official statement about the incident and all the discrimination I've faced. Ellis stood up straighter, exhaling deeply. The situation had shifted. All control was no longer in his hands, I understand. So, during the remainder of the flight, is there anything I can do to make your experience more comfortable? Camille paused for a moment. I want to speak directly to the passengers. They deserve to know what's happening and why their journey might be affected. Ellis hesitated. By protocol, that would be the flight crew's responsibility to announce. But after a moment of consideration, he nodded. 5 minutes from now, I'll arrange it. 5 minutes later, Camille stood at the front of the cabin holding the microphone. She had spoken in front of hundreds of soldiers presented at international conferences. But this time she felt nervous for the personal reason behind it. Good afternoon, everyone, she began, her voice clear and calm. I'm Major Camille Brooks of the U.S. Army. Many of you have witnessed or have heard about the incident that just occurred. I want to be transparent with you when we land in San Diego. The plane will be met by military personnel and representatives of the airline. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces looking toward her. In the economy section, passengers sat up to look, in first class. Jaden gave her a thumbs up, silently cheering her on. What happened today, Camille continued, was not just one individual's wrongful act. It reflects a larger issue in how we view others through uniforms, skin color, or gender. I apologize if this has disrupted your journey. But sometimes for better things to happen, we need to stop for a moment. Throughout my 22 years of service in the military, Camille Brooks continued, her voice clear as though speaking to the entire nation. Not just the cabin of the plane, I have faced all forms of prejudice and discrimination. Usually, I remain silent and move on. But sometimes there's a line crossed, and if I stay silent, I become part of the problem. She gently placed her hand on her cheek, the faint red mark still visible from the slap as a living testament. No one, whether in uniform or not, regardless of their skin color, should endure an attack, especially from someone in a position to serve the public. She looked around the cabin. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Others sat in stunned silence while fingers quickly typed on phones, sharing this moment in the sky on social media. Finally, Camille said, her tone softening, "If what I've shared means anything to you, please continue this conversation. Let's contribute to protecting values like respect, equality, and dignity in every small action we take. Whether you're in San Diego, Dallas, or anywhere between, your voice, your witness, it matters." Camille stepped away from the microphone, returning to her seat amidst scattered but sincere applause. It was the most public, the most personal speech of her career, not on a battlefield, but in a cabin 11,000 meters above the ground. Jaden looked at her, his face beaming as though he had just watched a TED Talk. Evelyn Parker reached across the aisle, gently taking Camille's hand. "Walter would be so proud," she whispered as a blessing. "I can't believe this." Jaden muttered, his eyes glued to his phone. "The clip is blowing up thousands of views already. People are asking how to follow you." Camille shook her head, a mix of amusement and disbelief. It was hard to believe that her private humiliation was turning into a public wave. "I don't use social media." Jaden gaped. "What? No way. This has to be fixed right now. You've got to tell your story. You can't let others tell it for you." The plane began descending, preparing to land. Camille's phone vibrated in her pocket. General Grayson was calling back. She answered, fully aware that the eyes and ears around her were attuned to the conversation. "Major Brooks," General Grayson's voice rang out firm and authoritative. "I've spoken with the CEO of Delta. They are taking this very seriously. A security and legal team will meet you at the gate." "Thank you, sir," Camille replied. "I appreciate the support. It's not just support." Grayson's voice softened slightly. "It's responsibility. The days when someone could disrespect a military officer, especially one from a minority group without consequence, are over. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has personally assured me Camille's heart skipped a beat. The situation had escalated all the way to the highest levels of power. Sir, I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't cause this." Major Grayson interrupted. "You reacted correctly to an unacceptable situation. The airline has officially apologized, and they've confirmed they will fire the flight attendant. More importantly, they've agreed to completely overhaul their staff training program with oversight from the Department of Defense." When the call ended, Camille sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the seat back in front of her. The reaction was too fast, the scale too large. She hadn't had time to prepare herself. From beside her, Jaden asked quietly, "Are you okay?" Camille nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's just that when you fight for so long, sometimes you forget that real change is possible." Through the window, the city of San Diego came into view. Sunlight glistening on the distant Rocky Mountains inside. Camille was a strange mix, relieved but drained. Vindicated, but once again becoming an unwilling symbol for a greater fight than herself. Captain Ellis's voice came over the intercom announcing the upcoming landing and apologizing for the unexpected disruption. He promised the airline would assist passengers with connecting flights and thank them for their patience. What he didn't say and couldn't say over the public address system was that Flight 1380 was about to become a national focal point. The video had gone viral. Hashtags were trending, and what had occurred inside this metal tube would soon be discussed at the Pentagon and in boardrooms. As the plane touched down smoothly, the wheels hitting the runway with a screech as the engines reversed. Camille closed her eyes for a moment to gather her composure for what was coming next. When she opened her eyes, Jaden and Evelyn were looking at her, not with curiosity but with respect. "Whatever happens next," Evelyn said softly, "just remember that today you did something very important, not just for yourself, but for so many others, those who won't have the chance or strength to speak out like you did. And we'll always support you." Jaden added, holding up his phone. Online and in real life, Camille smiled. This strange alliance, a teenager, an elderly woman, and a female officer, now felt like a small family in the sky. The plane slowly taxied to the gate. Through the window, Camille saw the welcoming team wait in military personnel in crisp uniforms, airline representatives, and the unmistakable flashing lights of television cameras. "Wow," Jaden exhaled, pressing his face against the window. "This is big." "Yeah," Camille replied, adjusting her collar and standing tall, but remember, she looked at both of her companions. "This isn't just about me or about one flight attendant. This is about forcing systems to take responsibility for the environments they create and the behaviors they inadvertently encourage." The ding sounded, the seatbelt sign turned off. Passengers began to stir. Retrieving their luggage, Captain Ellis's voice came through one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until we have made our final stop. Thank you for your cooperation." A wave of murmurs spread throughout the cabin. Eyes turned back to Camille, not with suspicion but with respect and curiosity. At the back of the cabin, Heather Collins sat silently, completely isolated, her face pale, her eyes vacant as she contemplated the consequences of an act born from prejudice and unchecked power. In the cockpit, Captain Ellis finished the landing procedures, mechanically flipping switches, but his mind was already preparing for the official testimony that would follow. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers began to look back at the final moments, not to forget, but to ensure that what happened today wouldn't be forgotten or downplayed. Standing on the threshold of a completely new chapter in her already remarkable career, Camille Brooks understood that the road ahead would be both wide open and full of challenges. The military uniform she wore was no longer just a symbol of dedication and sacrifice. Now it represented something bigger, a demand for respect rising above rank, title, or skin color. It was a message to everyone who served, regardless of gender or background. As the plane door opened and the first military officer stepped into the cabin, Camille tightened her shoulders, stood up, and walked down the aisle. The battle that had started in the confined space of the airplane would now continue on a larger front, the public and policy arena. But this time Camille knew she wasn't fighting alone. From generals at the Pentagon to teenagers on social media, from fellow soldiers to everyday citizens, everyone had seen something in this story. A reminder that dignity is not a reward, but a basic right, and that every small moment could become the battleground for the long fight for equality. All it takes is one situation, one stance, one video, and one witness for a truth to spread. And in this struggle, Camille, as she had shown at 35,000 feet, proved one thing. Clearly, silence was no longer an option. In the days that followed, the story of Flight 1380 spread like wildfire across news outlets and social media. Hashtags began to trend: "Hound respect," "Their service," "Hound fly with dignity," "Hound flight 1380 truth." Television programs debated fiercely, would the public's reaction have been different if Camille hadn't been in uniform? What if she were just an ordinary black woman? Delta Airlines quickly issued a public apology, not just to Camille, but to all military personnel and passengers, acknowledging that the incident was a failure in their commitment to fair and respectful treatment for all customers. They announced a comprehensive review of their training processes and the creation of a diversity and inclusion director position. Reporting directly to the CEO, Heather Collins, was fired. In an emotional interview on a conservative news channel, she claimed she was misunderstood, that the slap was just a result of losing her balance during turbulence. But the video evidence told a different story. Despite some groups defending her and calling it cancel culture, the truth prevailed as many passengers stepped forward as witnesses. Captain Robert Ellis received formal praise for how he handled the situation, though an internal investigation revealed he should have intervened sooner. Later, he would incorporate this incident into training sessions for new pilots on conflict management and spotting signs of discrimination. Jaden Lee, the teenager who filmed the video, became a sensation online. His TikTok account skyrocketed in followers overnight. He used his newfound voice to share more stories of discrimination and call for support for military personnel. At first, his parents were shocked to see their son go viral, but eventually they understood and appreciated the ideals their son was standing for, even as they reminded him to submit his college applications on time. Evelyn Parker, the woman who witnessed everything, sent a letter to the local newspaper. At my age, people often think they've seen enough, learned enough. But what I witnessed on that flight made me realize learning and growing never end, no matter how long you've lived. Initially, the Pentagon planned to quietly appoint Camille to the advisory board of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but after the incident, that decision was made public as an official recognition of her undeniable leadership and capability. In just one night, Camille became one of the most influential black female officers in the U.S. military. Her email inbox was flooded with messages from young women wanting to learn about a military career, from fellow soldiers sharing similar experiences, and from strangers simply wanting to say, "I support you." 2 weeks after the flight, Camille was in Washington, D.C., preparing to meet with congressional representatives concerned about discrimination in the commercial aviation industry. As she sat in the Capitol Hill waiting room, her phone buzzed with a message from David Washington, her friend, her comrade who had always believed in her. "Very proud of you, but not surprised at all. You've always known when to hold your ground." Camille smiled, remembering how many times David had told her leadership is not about being at the top, but about knowing when not to compromise, when it would be easiest to let things slide. A young assistant appeared at the door. "We're ready." Major Brooks. Camille adjusted her uniform and walked into the room, where policy decisions that could affect millions would be discussed, originating from one woman, one flight, and one seemingly ordinary day that had become extraordinary. The weight of representation still rested heavily on her shoulders, but this time she was no longer carrying it alone. Behind her stood an ever-growing collective, witnesses, allies, each holding a piece of the story, each stepping forward to ensure that dignity was not a privilege, but a right for everyone. As Camille began her speech, eyes bright, spirit resolute, she wasn't aiming at a particular individual. She was aiming at the system, and in that moment she remembered what her father, a Vietnam War veteran, had said to her the day she enlisted. "The uniform you wear doesn't just represent who you are, it represents who we are trying to become." Today, in that moment, Camille understood more clearly than ever that at this moment, that statement had never been truer. Sometimes, moments that seem small, an accusing glance, a dismissive comment, an impolite gesture, hold the power to expose the deepest cracks in how we treat each other. The story of Major Camille Brooks on Flight 1380 is not just an aviation incident. It's not just a matter between a passenger and a flight attendant. It is a story of honor, courage, and the willingness to stand up when everyone around tells you to stay silent. She didn't shout, didn't make a scene, didn't seek revenge. She chose to speak straightforwardly, calmly, and with weight. She chose to use her voice and integrity to protect not just herself, but also those who have no opportunity, no status, no power to speak up. And what's amazing is that Camille didn't stand alone. Beside her was a teenager carrying the integrity of a new generation, a woman of advanced age who had witnessed an era of division, now ready to speak out for justice. A captain who knew when to act. A nation learning how to listen. Once again. We live in an era where videos, tweets, and stories can spread within hours. But instead of seeing this as a negative, we can turn social media into a platform to protect kindness. So that every time someone is overlooked, pushed aside, judged by their skin color or gender, our community can stand up with them. And if you're reading this, perhaps you believe in that too. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Who inspired you in this story? Camille, Jaden, Evelyn, or maybe it's you. We read every comment, and each share is a boost to the journey for a fairer society. Don't forget to hit like if you think this story deserves to be spread, and share this video with your friends and family. Because who knows, they may need a little inspiration or a reminder that dignity is non-negotiable. And if you want to continue joining us on these heartfelt, meaningful, and impactful stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel because we have many more memorable journeys waiting for you ahead. Thank you for following through to the end of the video. We believe that every view, every share, and every person like you is helping write a better America. See you in the next story. And remember, the right thing is not always the easiest, but it is always worth it.